You're listening to the Valley Current.
Hey, Joe. You sound like you're in church. Are you in church there?
Well, I probably should be, but
You're about to get married? Is that what you're saying?
no. Every relationship has its trials and tribulations.
Well, are
We
you
do
inviting
worship?
your fiance out to get married, out to church?
No. We do attend church on a regular basis, however.
Oh, there's something to be said for that. I have to say, I'm convinced that the future of church might well be including some yoga moves for people that are in the church. Like, I think that
Ah,
yoga and spirituality are becoming a big topic in America and maybe even throughout the world, but maybe that's just what I see.
yeah, it's an interesting world. There's so much going on, and I feel like maybe it's just my imagination, but things are potentially moving quicker than they ever have before.
Well, everything is moving faster, and at the same time, everyone feels like um, they're overwhelmed. Like,
Yeah,
you
right.
would think all these tools would make life easier. All these tools would be like enabling a much more relaxed approach to everything, a much more thoughtful approach to everything. And the reality is, people feel overwhelmed and
Yeah.
they feel like the tools represent just another thing to master that they wish they didn't have to do. Like, there was some report recently that said um, the businesses are adopting AI left, right, and sideways, but the actual employee usage is very minimal. Like, in
Yeah,
other
you
words,
know what? I believe that. I really do. I was just going to say what we've talked about before, and what I know, and you know better than anyone, is that you could have the most remarkable technology, component, tool, device, whatever, but people are reluctant to change. All of us are creatures of habit. I mean, I enjoy it, I embrace it, but I would just gather to say 70%, 80% of people would probably tell you, if they're honest, they don't really like change.
80 or 80 to 90% of people, working people, we have
Uh-huh.
330 million people,
Yeah,
but
right.
probably less than half actually work. And then
Hmm.
about half that work, probably less than half actually really work in a real sense of the word.
Yeah.
But let's call it 150 million people that actually work.
Hmm.
Most of them just want to saw wood, which is
Yeah.
no challenge, no
Yep.
anxiety. And the truth is, the businesses want to imagine that everyone on the workforce is gaining new skills and
I know. Right.
enabling new productivity, right?
Yep. Yep.
I mean, it's a funny world in that sense. And I don't know,
That's
maybe it's just a transition, Joe. What do you think? You think we're just in transition and it's all going to get a lot better?
I think it's in a transition, but I also believe that there's so much hype and so much spending on AI and capital spending right now. And every time you turn around, there's billions and billions and billions. People try, I know they're trying to keep up with the race to the top, but it's almost might be a race to the bottom, because you're not going to have, I can't imagine having thousands of winners in this game. Maybe a handful, maybe 50, 60 companies thrive. Um, in the meantime, they spend a lot of money, and I'm a pretty optimistic person, but there's got to be some kind of a bubble with AI. And I'm not saying it's going to completely blow up the economy and the stock market, but there's got to be a pullback, right? There just has to be. What about this? And you could probably speak to it more. This circle financing, they call it. It's almost like, you know, invisible money. It's really there, but it's not there. Do you know much about this stuff?
Well, the argument is that all these companies that are the leaders of AI, starting with NVIDIA on the hardware side and
Mhm.
going to all the other companies on the software side, OpenAI being the big cheerleader,
Mhm.
all do deals with each other, right? So they're
Right.
all doing deals where they're essentially creating this. In Japan, it would be called a keiretsu, this
Hmm.
circle of interested companies that are cross-pollinizing each other in a way
Hmm.
that makes it look like they're all doing a fabulous amount of business. But the truth
Hmm.
is that whether it actually will distribute out to all these other companies, the rest of us or the rest of the world,
Hmm.
in a way that makes productivity really happen is an open question, because when interviews are done with people that have been given these tools, which of course, if you have a Microsoft account, you have a Copilot built in,
Right.
are they
Right.
actually using it? Are they actually on a daily basis using it for more than their horoscope? Are they
Right.
doing things that help the business? And the latest survey suggested that it was a very low percent, like under 10%, that were
I
actually
believe it.
implemented into their workflows to
Hmm.
produce more efficiency. And
Yeah.
that's an interesting stat of your point, that there's a lot of inertia, and
Yeah.
people like doing things the way they like doing things, right?
Yeah. They do. No, they
I mean,
do. They don't-
when you look at the lending business as an
Mhm.
example, because I saw
Yeah.
your alert that rates had dropped because the Fed did this little drop, and maybe we're
Hmm.
getting back to 4%, maybe even eventually expecting next year 3%. I mean, give us your view. That's your business, and you watch it daily. What do you think is happening?
Yeah. Well, it's just interesting because the last two times the Fed actually lowered the prime lending rate by a quarter, the rates went up a little bit. So it's an interesting dynamic, and it's a confusing one for the consumer because most people, when they hear great news, the rate, the Fed's cutting by a quarter, they automatically think the next day they're going to wake up, have their breakfast, and 30-year mortgages are going to be a quarter less in rate. And that's not the way it works. There's typically a trailing effect on the mortgage, the long-term mortgage rates. The prime, most people don't know, is tied to the prime lending rate is credit cards, home equity lines, personal loans, things of that nature. They're not directly tied to the mortgage-backed securities. However, you do get a trailing effect. So my guess is the next couple of weeks we'll probably see a little bit of a dip in the rates. But I do believe, and I'm kind of preparing for this with a team, and I'll have to talk. I don't know if we have time on this show, but I'm working with a group of people. We're actually building an AI lead generation program, probably one of a kind in the mortgage industry. We're going to launch in February. Um, and my belief is that primarily because Trump has been trying to get rid of the Fed, and he will, as of May next year, he'll have a new Fed in place. And I hate to say it, whether you like Trump and you like his politics or you don't or do, um, the rates are going to go down because he wants them to go down, and his new Fed's going to follow lockstep with him. And so, to answer your question, I do think we could get back into 4%, maybe four middle fours, high fours. I would highly doubt that we get back in the threes unless we have some kind of war or political issue that comes into play, something unknown that we can't see, geopolitical activity. Um, but I could easily see getting back in the mid to high fours, sometime in the next year.
And you probably get people that call you all the time and say, what should my timing be? Like, even for
Yeah.
yourself, it must be an interesting question for yourself about what should your timing be? Because in some ways, if you're shopping around and you're looking at, well, where do I want to land my next home, my residence, or my next investment property? Because there
Right.
are
Right.
cases where some investment properties are kind of down. Office buildings in particular are still
Yeah.
down, right?
Yeah.
And these
Yeah.
rates will impact a lot of the numbers right across the
They
board.
will. They will. The interesting dynamic so far in most of these marketplaces, not a lot, you're starting to see some softening, but like in the Bay Area, as you know, it's super unique. We now have a super low inventory. I mean, it's down around 700 homes on the market in the Santa Clara County, which is, we had 13, 1400 several months ago. And I always put into perspective, people say, well, what's that compared to? Well, a normal market in the Santa Clara County that size, a normal market would have about 3,500 homes on the market. So you have this supply issue, and as long as you have the supply issue, you're just going to, unfortunately, these prices are still going to be elevated on home prices. I don't know. We just got severely locked up after COVID. People enjoying these 2.5%, 3% interest rates. They don't want to let them go. And now, for the first time, we are seeing some softening, especially in these secondary markets. I mean, you're seeing a lot out there in Florida, especially in the condo markets, in some areas where it's really starting to soften. You're starting to get more inventory, but this area is still very unique. So, in terms of when is a good time, when people ask me, mine is always the same. If it's a primary residence and you really want to live somewhere, when you find the right place, I would buy it anytime. That's always my suggestion. If you're
Oh, so
long term,
you say you could always refinance. Don't let the financial horse be in front of the buggy that you want to live in for the rest of your life. Get the buggy, and then we'll figure out what horse to tie it to, right?
yeah, yeah, I think so. But you and I and the guys had a interesting conversation on that fishing trip, which I think it's a worthy one. And you made the point, and you have before recently, is that much reach is that when people say my dream home, you're quick to say, and I think you're accurate, Jack, that you think it's your dream home, and not to be, negative, but we think it's our dream home, and then 5 years later, you have a parent you lose, you have a wife, you have a divorce, you have a family member that gets sick, and all of a sudden you lose a job. I mean, talk a little, because that's the part we all could remember our dream home, right? Right.
Oh, I
But
remember.
that,
Look, I
yeah.
remember when I graduated from law school and had my after I worked for a judge, and I came up to Palo Alto from Los Angeles, and I remember I'd always lived in apartments in Los Angeles,
Hmm.
and I remember, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to find a nice house. We had this sticker shock. Even back then, I had this sticker shock, and I remember when it was finally this little tiny cottage. It's probably worth $2+ million now, but back then we thought it was crazy that they were asking whatever $50,000 for it, and we were like, God, it's going to require $10,000 down payment, and where are we going to get
Yeah.
that? And da 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 da, and what's the mortgage going to cost? And of course, your salary is tiny. And
Yeah.
I remember thinking at the time, oh, finally, we found this great house. This is so wonderful. And we outgrew it within like 3 years. And it was like, this doesn't work anymore. We got to move.
Sure.
And we moved around the corner. I mean, we liked the neighborhood so much.
Yeah.
We loved College Terrace in Palo Alto. But yes, your whole mindset changes as life throws you whatever curveballs it throws you,
Yeah.
right?
It does. It does. And I'll have to tell you, I'm starting to make an adjustment, but it's been um 2 years, I think 2 years now. Since I think it's almost 2 years now since for the first time since I've been in my 20s, I don't currently own any property. That is a really weird thing for
No
me.
property, no investment property, no nothing, zero across the
No,
board.
at the
Wow.
moment, it's really strange, honestly. I,
Now you're sitting
you
on
know,
like you're sitting on 10 or $15 million of cash somewhere, Joe.
I wish. Well, some of that got dissolved, but it's still very difficult, but it's difficult psychologically and emotionally. I have a couple of financial planners and advisors I trust and I work with, and they tell me, Joe, at your age, seriously, you start looking at numbers and how much you spend on a home, and they make a pretty good case of why. I know you didn't want to end up here, but this is not so bad in a way,
Well,
because now you could.
they would argue, make a choice now that you're not going to regret, right? Because you
Right,
don't get a
right,
lot of you don't get a lot of do-overs. Like you had a lot, I had a lot of do-overs. You had a lot of do-overs. When we're healthy and we're in our
right,
20s, there's
right,
so many do-overs where you say, yeah, that house was okay, but it wasn't the
right,
best. And
right.
you get, but when you get to your 50s and 60s and 70s, and I talked to a guy that's really a guy that's been in the practice law a long time. I'll leave his name out, but he's probably going to make it soon to 60 years in practice, and he's going to get to his
Wow.
80s. And, that's a big marker. And literally he said, look, we downsized twice already. Kids are all gone, da, 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 da. Now we're actually thinking about an assisted living reservation. And should
Mm.
we own an assisted living or should we rent an assisted living? Because if you own an assisted living, you have to imagine your estate's going to eventually sell. And I don't know if that product is going to go up, down, or sideways as opposed to renting and just investing in something that's much more liquid that the kids or
Right.
grandkids or maybe even great grandkids will be able to get in some hopefully tax smart way out of the estate. And they're debating that. And this is called the
Right.
final move, right?
Mm-hmm.
The ultimate
Yeah.
final move. And it's a good question. And we've had, as you know, people on who have gone overseas and been able to find life with assisted living at a much lower cost than it would ever be in
Yeah.
Silicon Valley. That's for sure. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. It is the real estate. It's an interesting, I would say emotionally, I'll say this again, I'll keep back. If you have a family, it's a great place. It's great to have a place you could all gather on holidays or certain events where everybody gets together. I think that is something that's extremely valuable. You can't put a number on. But also, after you get to a certain age and your kids are doing their own thing, and you don't want to wait too long before you start enjoying life, so to speak, either. And you could argue right now, even though it's tempting sometimes to run out and buy a house, I think to myself, then am I going to be spending 30, 40% of my time working on it? I don't know.
Well,
I don't
well,
know.
and it does prevent some other optionality. So, for example, if you like to travel and you used to work for the
Right.
airline business, so you do, and you probably
Yep.
do more than almost everyone that you are ever going to either marry or date, or that you have married or dated, probably because
Yep.
you've got kind of like my dad was very much a Navy guy and he loved to travel, and my mom didn't. And he would do things even without her that, of course, pissed her off because his view is, hey, I want to see this part of the world and you don't want to get on a plane, so I'm going to do it. And at the end, they stayed married, of course, because that was the thing to do. But at some point, he became very independent in things that he would do without her because she didn't like getting on planes. She didn't like to
Mm.
travel, and he loved
Yep.
to do it right up to the end. But the point I'm making is, when you have a house, you're a little tied down to taking care of the house. And there are people that live an Airbnb lifestyle of month here, month there, month next place, and literally they just go from Airbnb to Airbnb, and they are literally perpetual travelers with a
Right.
view that they don't owe tax allegiance to any state of the United States, and maybe even not even to the federal government. Like, that's how far
Right.
they go with that view. And footnote, Clarence Thomas, who's a Supreme Court justice and does have a house and is married and has kids and so on, and
Mm-hmm.
now the most senior, and he's black. He's the black judge that's on the
Right.
Supreme Court of the U.S. He
Right.
he has an RV. Of course, I think he got it as a gift or something, or it was financed by some friend or something that raised a lot of controversy. But he likes to travel. And he
Mm-hmm.
literally, when the court is when he's got his free time during the summer, he gets in his big RV and he drives all over the U.S. to
Interesting.
various
Wow.
campgrounds. I can't even imagine what the Secret Service must be around him for those little
Right.
RV
Right.
trips. But he likes to travel, and he
Wow.
likes going out to the road and talking to people, not as a justice of the Supreme Court, but as just Clarence Thomas, and he probably uses another name and probably dresses differently, is my guess. But it's
Yeah.
kind of interesting because some people do retire in RVs and some people do retire in cruise ships. They literally
Yeah.
get on a cruise ship and they go from one ship to another, and they live 360 days plus a year on various ships throughout the world. They do that.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't know what it's going to feel like, but you could easily rent on Airbnb a big enough place once a year for any sort of Christmas or New
That's
Year's
true.
thing. Like it's all
Yeah.
doable. It just the typical issue for most clients that I talk to, I'm sure that yours is, what's the school system and where are my kids going to
Right,
get a good grade
right,
and high school, and hopefully at public expense, because that's kind of baked
right,
into the property tax system. Lots of
right,
those dollars are going to the local schools. So the
right.
rating of the local school ends up to be, but that's irrelevant to you once your kids are gone. It's
Yeah,
irrelevant,
really
right?
is.
And so,
Yeah, it
so
really
right
is.
now,
It's
so right now, how are you looking at the decision of where you go? Because this must be a model for other people you talk to, right?
yeah, I'm not in a hurry. But so I kept keeping my eye on things. What is interesting is foreclosures are up 14% year over year nationwide. So you are, it's kind of funny when we don't hear a lot about it. It's kind of under the radar still. But the other piece to this that I'm keeping an eye on, I just got to believe, and I could be wrong. Later next year, at one point there has to be, I shouldn't say has to, that's probably not the right word. There likely should be a correction of some sorts because you can't keep continuing that path, and cost of living doesn't compete and stay up with that. The income levels don't stay up with that. And by the way, debt, consumer debt has never been this high since they've been recording it on history. So my point is there's some kind of breaking point coming. And I do think this is going to be a piece of the pie that happens when these rates get probably back into the low fives, fours. You're going to have a flood of people that have been holding on for dear life to those 3% interest rates. Now it makes sense for them to move up, buy, sell, retire, consolidate debt. And I've never seen this dynamic in the last 25 years I've been in this business. So I do think next year, I would say by second to third quarter, probably second quarter will start, maybe third. We're going to see. I think it's going to be a completely different market. I think things are going to really start moving. You're going to get a lot of more homes on the market. We could see the price reductions start probably second or third quarter next year.
So you would say to people that are wanting to be in Silicon Valley, Santa Clara County, or really San
Mm-hmm.
Mateo County, probably even San Francisco, or even Santa Cruz, all those counties,
Mm-hmm.
um, wait a little bit, because the inventory is too low, and the price will reflect that the supply
All right.
therefore is too low, and the demand is
Yeah.
still pretty much there because the businesses keep hiring. The major layoffs that we're expecting from AI haven't really fully hit in
No.
Silicon Valley yet. Maybe that's in process. Maybe that'll happen next year. Uh, and you would say, but if you find the dream home, obviously,
Yeah.
get it, get it, and you would be able to work on the financing in the first
Yeah.
instance, as well as
Mm-hmm.
develop a plan for when the rates drop. How do you decide to do your refinancing? When is that triggered, and so on? And
Mm-hmm.
you go for it with that perspective in mind, right?
Yeah. That's right.
And
And then
make sure your credit score is good. Make sure you get the pre-qualifications. Make sure you do everything to put yourself in the best position to make
yeah.
a strong offer, because there will be competing offers. But if you lose,
Yeah.
don't regret it, because there'll be probably more inventory, a lot more inventory next year.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think if you're looking and you find a house you really love, don't wait, do it if you could afford it and continue to look. But if that aren't in a hurry and they can't find their dream home, I wouldn't be in a hurry to do it. I'd wait. I do think next year is going to be a good time. The other thing I want to, before we wrap up, I do want to add in terms of the age in which you decide what you're going to do with real estate. I'll give those an example as you're listening to this podcast. It really is age related. I'll tell you, and again, only because I'm going through it. If you're in your 60s, 65, 60-ish or whatever,
You look
and
like you're
you've
in your
gained
40s, man. You look like you're in your 40s.
and you've gained all this equity over the last 30, 40 years in your property, right? So let's say, just for sake of conversation here as an example, you're looking at a couple of properties, and whether you want to or not, you liquidate and you get $2 or $3 million. And some people might say, "Oh yeah, but look at what it's done the last 30 years." But then my response to that would be, "Yeah, but you don't have another 30 or 40 years. So take your equity. I'm not saying do this unless you have to, but if you take your equity now and invest it even conservatively, right? And you're 65 years old, do you really care what the value of that home is when you're 90? I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, that's going to be passed on to your children or grandchildren or something else. My point is, if don't make the mistake in having all your assets in a house or homes if it limits you in what you could do to enjoy life at a certain.
Right. Right.
I see it all the time, Jack. I see people house rich, cash poor. They struggle because they have this house worth $3 million. They don't owe anything, but they can't do anything because they have no income.
And then they've got to do a reverse mortgage, which may not
Right,
be actually the best product
right,
out there, and they're suffering,
right.
and they get one bad thing that happens to them, they slip and fall, whatever, and they need assisted living or something else,
Yep,
and they can't make it happen without a fire sale, which is kind of
right.
the awful thing. I want to make a remark before we end, because I've been
Yeah.
reading Andrew Sorkin's book called 1929, which is a very comprehensive history of what led to the big crash,
Oh,
what
that's right.
led.
I saw him interviewed. Okay,
Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah,
Yeah.
he's good. He's good. He reads the book. I, of course, as you know, I like to exercise when I like to listen as I am
All right.
biking or yoga or whatever. Although I almost got kicked out of the yoga studio the other day because someone said, "Oh, your earphones are too loud and we can hear them." And I was like, "The music blasting in this yoga studio is so loud, no one can hear anything." But they were like jealous that I was actually getting some intellectual value out of listening to a book on tape, which was a
Yeah.
different book. And it wasn't that loud. For the record, it wasn't that loud. But the really funny part is, I discovered that you really can listen and do even weightlifting in a gym. So I've started
Oh,
this
I can see
program of
that. Yeah.
weightlifting. So
Yeah.
I'm listening to 1929. You'll really get a kick out of this.
Uh,
And it really is talking about how bubbly the market was 100 years ago. Like literally, like we're
mhm.
in 2025. So 1925, 100 years ago, we had this like bubbling effect of people starting to recognize that it was a golden age: electricity, airplanes, cars, telephones, all this new technology, the Wall Street financing of home purchases of TVs, home purchases of radios,
Yeah.
home purchases of washing machines, like all this stuff that was happening that was 100 years ago that we take for granted today. I don't think you can even sell a house that doesn't have a dishwasher in it. Like, I don't think you can. Someone would say, "What? I'm going to buy it with a kitchen and no dishwasher? Are you crazy?" Even if it's a fixer-upper. They're like, "No, we got
Yeah.
to rip the kitchen out." Right? They're like, "Oh, it didn't have a dishwasher. That's going to discount it." So, like today, everyone just expects everything, right? And even more. It's the
Yeah.
point that you made. But
Right.
1929, Sorkin does a really good job at how this big, ginormous buildup happened. And a lot of it had exactly to do with the point you just made, which is people were just over levered across the board. And they were just buying stock on margin. And back then, you could have 10% down and you could own a share of RCA. Remember RCA
Hmm.
Victor, the
Yeah.
original
Yeah.
turntable, the original record company,
Yeah.
RCA, Radio Corporation of America. You could buy that $1,000 stock with $100. Well, the $100 stock when it was 100, it eventually
Hmm.
went to over 1,000. But basically, for like $10, you can get a
Wow.
share of stock worth $100, and they would finance the other
Hmm.
$90 based on the holding of the stock and the expectation that it would just keep going up. And there's a bit of that same bubbly aspect going on with the development of AI. It's sort of
Yeah.
like we're in this new world now. Of course, margin rules are different. There's a lot more regulation. The Securities and Exchange Commission exists. There's a lot more, presumably, there's a lot
Right.
more Fed Reserve oversight, hopefully. I mean, if it's not been corrupted by politics, knock on wood, hopefully
Mhm.
it's not. But just generally speaking, I think that's a must read. I've been saying to
Oh,
everyone,
that's good. It's good.
including it,
Okay.
yeah, I'll send you the link. It is an
Yeah, I'd love
absolute
to.
must read
Okay.
or must listen. I would say listen to it
Must
because
listen. Yeah.
Sorkin does a really good job of emphasizing the points. He puts a little
Hmm.
intonation because he's making some points along the way about milestones that happened in the run up and milestones that are happening today. Because we're still sort of 4 years away from the 100th birthday. We're 4 years away from 2029, which will be the 100th birthday. And that's gotta make you a little worried because people talk about 100-year
Yeah.
cycles and they talk about how things just seem to happen in cyclic ways when
Yeah. Yeah.
psychology goes over the top. And maybe that's what you're referring to, Joe. I wonder if that's
So he's
really what you're
drawn.
referring to.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to get that and listen to that. So he's drawing the comparisons, and I know this sounds funny because we sit around, most of us, and we listen to all these so-called experts, and anybody on TV and financial markets would never tell the truth, even if they thought there was a correction coming, because they couldn't, because that it would affect their financial future. But what I know is it's going to be something, and I don't know if it's in the next couple of years. I don't know if it's next year. I don't know, but there's got to be a pullback, and I'll say there will be a pullback in the housing market and the stock market. And I know that people will argue every time you say that. They'll say, "No, this is different than the mortgage meltdown," and "No, this is different than the dot com." But remember back then they said, "Oh no, this is different then too," right? So
Right,
I'm
because
not. I'm not.
there had been a bit of a crash in 1907 that people don't realize, and there was the
Right.
pandemic of 1908. So look at all the analogies that are playing out because
Right.
we had a pandemic just
We did.
I guess 6 years ago, if you really want to count back to when China really discovered that their first. Because I just finished Robert F. Kennedy's book again, listening to it on tape about the
Mhm.
Wuhan cover up. And basically, the very first victim of the COVID-19 flu was August of 2019. August, the
Wow.
summer of
Wow.
2019. And that's
Wow.
not a very well known fact, but that's a documented fact. And it's been covered over and turned into,
Mm.
oh, it was much later, because it tends to undermine the theory that it was all from the wet market. It suggests it was actually due to a bioweapon that was
Mm.
leaked out of the Wuhan lab by a lab person who left the lab having been infected and got on a train,
Yeah.
and the train got infected. And there's a whole
Wow.
lineup of people that ended up going to the hospital that were
Wow.
living near that train line. He does a good job. He must have a great team of researchers and probably a great ghostwriter, but he does a
I'm
really
sure.
good job of laying it out. And really, that when you combine both Sorkin's book 1929 with Kennedy's book, which I'll send you the link about the
Okay.
Wuhan cover up,
Yeah.
we've got kind of a good analogy here of what played out with the Spanish flu in 1908, and then
Mhm.
the destruction of the market in
Yeah.
1929. I mean, it's really an interesting parallel, and that
Yeah.
that both things had a big impact in the early
Yeah.
1900s. So it's hard to imagine there won't be a big impact here as we make our way in the 21st century. If you
Yeah.
think about it. So anyway,
There
Joe,
will
what are you
be.
doing?
It's coming.
What are you doing? What are you doing for the holidays?
Well, we're gonna be around here. As you know, we're gonna have our 24th annual Chipino gathering. Sorry, we're gonna miss you for that one, but you'll be in beautiful, I'm sure, relaxing in Mexico,
You,
soaking up the sun.
you should do a live. You should do a live stream or something. You should do
That's
like
not
a
a bad
live.
idea. Yeah.
You should do like a live podcast from your party because you're the chef there, right?
Yeah.
You're
Yeah. We
you're
got
the
the.
chef that's building the Chipino, right?
That's not a bad idea. That would be a fun thing to do. Yeah.
Well, you'd have to share. You'd have to share your recipe because you're the chef that makes the great Chipino that lasts right through New Year's Day, doesn't it? When you're
I
all
got
is
a
said and done.
quick funny story about my recipe. So a lot of the stuff I do, I just don't have recipes. I just done it over feel and sense over the years, right? I have written. So about 5 or 6 years ago, my oldest daughter said, she's a real kind of common sense, serious one. She says, Dad, do you have a recipe written down for the cioppino? And I said, no, I really don't. I just do it by feel and by heart. She goes, well, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but how are we going to continue the tradition when you die, if we don't have the recipe?
God, you're like, wait a minute, I'm going to live to 110 and you're talking about my eventual demise shortly? Ouch, that hurts.
So I had to put together the cioppino recipe on paper for her and get it to her.
Wow, Joe, you're a better man. Some people would have reacted very negatively about this.
I don't, everybody's going to die. Who knows? Just try to enjoy what you can while you're here. So,
Wow. Well, you're very kind, Joe. So on that note, have a happy holiday. This is probably our last podcast together
yes,
for
it is.
2025. It's been quite an interesting year. And
Yeah.
I guess I'll see you, if I don't see you at the podcast that you decide to do on New Year's Eve or Christmas Eve.
It's actually a day after. It'll be the day after Christmas this year.
Day after Christmas. So that's called Boxing Day. It's the Boxing Day cioppino. Maybe I should come in and we should podcast on that day. Find a half hour after you've had a few drinks. It might be an interesting discussion.
That'd be fun. Mic me up while I'm making cioppino and drinking wine.
That'd be fun. All right. Take care, Joe. Talk to you later.
Best to all your family, Jack. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.